The Night God Screamed wasn't just a low-budget horror film released in 1971. It was a quiet warning about what happens when belief stops being questioned and starts being obeyed. Set far from city's laws and witnesses, the film drops its characters into a religious commune where faith becomes routine and routine slowly turns into cruelty. There are no monsters hiding in the dark here. No supernatural force pulling the strings, just people convinced they are chosen and therefore untouchable. So why did this film appear at the exact moment America was growing afraid of cults? And why did it disappear just as quickly? These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about. The Night God Screamed. 1. The Night God Screamed arrived at a moment when American horror was quietly changing its target. By the early 1970s, audiences were no longer afraid of castles, laboratories, or gothic monsters. Fear had moved closer to home into ordinary spaces that looked harmless from the outside. This film understood that shift instinctively. Instead of presenting evil as something foreign or supernatural, it framed danger as something built slowly through routine obedience and isolation. The commune at the center of the story doesn't appear threatening in Evers. It looks structured, calm, even disciplined. But that calmness is precisely what makes it unsettling. The film spends an unusual amount of time showing everyday rituals, repeated prayers, and unquestioned authority, allowing tension to grow. Not through shocks, but through familiarity. What makes this approach unsettling is how little resistance the characters show. Violence doesn't erupt suddenly. It is normalized step by step, justified through belief rather than emotion. The film's horror emerges from watching people convince themselves that cruelty is not only acceptable, but necessary. In that sense, the movie feels less like a genre exercise and more like an observation. It watches how systems of control form when individuals surrender responsibility to a higher purpose. There is no charismatic villain demanding obedience with force. Instead, the structure itself becomes the antagonist. Everyone participates. Everyone contributes. No one feels personally guilty. This thematic focus places the film in a very specific cultural moment. Released just a few years after America became obsessed with real-world cult violence, the movie reflects a growing anxiety that danger no longer came from outsiders. It came from communities that looked peaceful, spoke softly, and claimed moral certainty. That fear was difficult to market and even harder to confront directly. As a result, the film avoided spectacle and embraced discomfort instead, a choice that likely contributed to its limited exposure. The irony is that this movie's refusal to sensationalize its subject may be exactly why it feels more disturbing today than it did upon release. What once seemed understated now feels uncomfortably realistic, as if the film wasn't exaggerating at all, only observing what people preferred not to see. 2. Unlike many horror films of its era, The Night God Screamed shows remarkable restraint in how it depicts violence. There are no elaborate set pieces designed to thrill or impress. Instead, the film often cuts away at the most uncomfortable moments, forcing the audience to imagine what happens rather than witness it directly. This wasn't simply a budgetary limitation. It was a deliberate storytelling choice. By withholding explicit imagery, the film shifts the burden of horror onto the viewer's interpretation. What matters is not what is shown, but what is justified. The camera frequently lingers on faces instead of actions. Expressions of certainty, obedience, and moral confidence replace screams or bloodshed. This visual strategy reinforces the film's central idea. The true danger lies in conviction, not chaos. Characters rarely appear panicked. They act with calm assurance, as though following instructions rather than committing harm. That emotional detachment creates a chilling contrast. Violence without anger becomes harder to condemn because it appears rational. The film suggests that belief can sanitize cruelty, making it feel procedural rather than personal. This approach also distances the audience from traditional horror catharsis. There is no release, no moment where fear spikes and resolves. Instead, unease accumulates gradually. Each scene adds another layer of justification, another reason for characters to believe they are right. The absence of overt shock forces viewers to confront the logic being presented rather than reacting instinctively. It's an uncomfortable position to be placed in, and not one audiences of the time were necessarily eager to occupy. The film's pacing reflects this philosophy. It moves deliberately, sometimes frustratingly slow, prioritizing atmosphere over momentum. For viewers expecting conventional thrills, this made the movie easy to dismiss. Critics often struggled to categorize it, unsure whether it was horror drama or social commentary. That ambiguity worked against it commercially, but it also allowed the film to avoid being trapped by genre expectations. The unsettling truth is that this restraint has allowed the film to age in an unexpected way. Modern audiences accustomed to extreme imagery may find the quietness more disturbing than explicit violence. The film doesn't compete for attention. It waits patiently, confident that discomfort will surface on its own, and it almost always does. 3. One of the most disturbing aspects of The Night God Screamed is how it removes the idea of a clear moral escape. Traditional horror often provides a survivor, a rebel, or at least a voice of skepticism to anchor the audience. This film offers very little of that comfort. Characters who question authority are not heroic figures leading resistance. They are isolated, uncertain, and quickly silenced by the structures surrounding them. The system does not need to shout or threaten. It simply absorbs dissent and moves on. This narrative choice reinforces a bleak implication. Once belief becomes communal, individuality becomes dangerous. The film treats conformity as both protection and weapon. Those who conform feel safe, justified, and morally elevated. Those who don't are framed as threats to order, regardless of their intentions. The horror doesn't come from a single leader manipulating followers, but from the collective agreement that obedience equals virtue. Responsibility is diluted across the group until no one feels personally accountable. What makes this particularly unsettling is how familiar it feels. The film never portrays its community as irrational or hysterical. Their actions are explained, discussed, and reinforced through shared language. Violence is framed as correction. Punishment is framed as necessity. The movie quietly suggests that systems like this do not require monsters or madness. They only require consistency and repetition. Once those elements are in place, cruelty can function smoothly. This perspective places the audience in a morally uncomfortable position. There is no clear moment where evil announces itself. Instead, viewers are invited to recognize how easily reasonable ideas slide into extreme behavior when left unchallenged. The absence of a traditional villain forces the audience to confront a more unsettling question: if no one person is responsible, who is to blame? The irony is that the film's bleakness may be its most honest feature. By refusing to offer a simple resolution or moral victory, it mirrors the real-world anxieties that inspired it. Faith, authority, and community are not presented as inherently dangerous only when they become unquestionable. And that ambiguity lingers long after the film ends, refusing to offer the comfort of a clear answer. 4. The Night God Screamed is often described as a film about religious extremism. But what makes it unsettling is how deliberately it avoids portraying belief as madness. The characters are not depicted as delusional or unstable. They are calm, focused, and internally consistent. Their actions follow a logic that makes sense within the closed system they inhabit. This distinction is crucial. The film does not suggest that faith drives people insane. It suggests that faith, when sealed off from doubt, becomes efficient. Throughout the film, authority is reinforced not through charisma, but through repetition. Rules are stated plainly, then repeated until they feel natural. No one raises their voice. No one needs to. The absence of overt coercion creates an illusion of choice, even as options quietly disappear. Characters participate willingly, convinced they are acting correctly. This portrayal challenges the comforting idea that extremism always announces itself through spectacle or fanaticism. Here it wears the face of routine. The film's dialogue plays a key role in this effect. Language is stripped of emotion and loaded with certainty. Words like order, purpose, and obedience are framed as virtues rather than warnings. When harm occurs, it is described in neutral terms as if documenting a process rather than committing an act. This linguistic distancing allows characters to separate themselves from consequences. Responsibility becomes abstract. Harm becomes a step, not a choice. This approach aligns with broader cultural anxieties of the era. In the early 1970s, Americans were beginning to confront how ordinary people could participate in extraordinary harm without feeling evil. The film taps into that fear quietly, without commentary or explanation. It trusts the audience to recognize the pattern on their own. That trust may have been its biggest risk. Viewers expecting moral guidance were instead given observation. The unsettling irony is that the film's calm tone makes its message harder to dismiss. There is no hysteria to blame, no insanity to point to. What remains is the uncomfortable implication that systems like this don't require broken minds, only unchallenged certainty. 5. Isolation functions as one of the film's most powerful tools, but it is presented less as a physical barrier and more as a psychological condition. The commune in The Night God Screamed is not surrounded by walls or guards. People are not chained or imprisoned. Instead, separation is achieved through belief. Once characters accept the rules of the community, the outside world gradually loses relevance. Doubt feels unnecessary. Escape feels illogical. The film reinforces this isolation through its visual design. Settings are sparse and repetitive, creating a sense of timelessness. Days blur together, defined by rituals rather than events. Without reference points, characters lose the ability to measure change. This environment discourages comparison, which is essential for critical thought. When nothing challenges the internal logic of the group, that logic hardens into truth. What's particularly unsettling is how voluntary this isolation appears. Characters are rarely forced to stay. They remain because leaving would mean admitting uncertainty. The film suggests that belief provides emotional security, even when it demands obedience. That trade-off is never presented as dramatic. It unfolds quietly through small concessions that accumulate until alternatives vanish. This subtle depiction mirrors real-world patterns more closely than overt captivity ever could. Control is achieved not by locking doors, but by redefining reality. The community becomes the only place where actions make sense. Outside perspectives are framed as corrupt, ignorant, or dangerous. By the time harm escalates, it feels justified within the closed worldview. The film's refusal to dramatize escape is intentional. There is no triumphant rebellion, no decisive break from the system. Instead, isolation tightens gradually, almost invisibly. The horror lies in recognizing how easily people can surrender autonomy without ever feeling trapped. The irony is that the absence of visible confinement makes the situation more disturbing. There are no chains to condemn, no obvious villains to blame. What remains is the realization that the strongest prisons are often built from agreement rather than force. 6. One reason The Night God Screamed feels so unsettling is its refusal to offer emotional release. Most horror films provide moments where tension spikes, then collapses into relief. This film withholds that structure entirely. Scenes end without resolution. Conflicts dissolve into routine. Even moments that should feel climactic are allowed to pass with minimal emphasis. The result is a persistent low-level unease that never fully dissipates. This narrative flatness is not accidental. It mirrors the emotional state of the community itself. Passion is discouraged. Extremes of feeling are viewed as instability. Calmness becomes a moral standard. By aligning the film's pacing with the internal logic of the group, the story immerses the audience in the same emotional environment as the characters. Viewers are not just observing control, they are experiencing it. The absence of catharsis also denies the audience a moral checkpoint. There is no single moment where events clearly cross a line. Instead, that line is erased gradually. By the time harm becomes undeniable, it has already been normalized. The film forces viewers to question when they themselves felt uncomfortable and why they continued watching anyway. This strategy may explain why the film struggled to find an audience upon release. It offers no comfort, no reassurance that evil will be punished or exposed. Instead, it ends with lingering uncertainty. The story feels incomplete not because it lacks an ending, but because the system it depicts remains intact. Nothing is resolved. Nothing is corrected. The disturbing twist is that this unresolved feeling is the point. The film refuses to close the door, it opens. By denying resolution, it suggests that systems like the one depicted do not end neatly. They persist quietly, sustained by belief and habit. And once that idea settles in, the film's true horror becomes impossible to shake. 7. The Night God. Screamed rarely shows moments of open cruelty, yet it constantly reminds the audience that cruelty is present. The film achieves this by focusing on anticipation rather than action. Scenes are structured around waiting for approval, waiting for instruction, waiting for judgment. This suspended state creates a quiet pressure that never releases. Characters learn to regulate themselves, adjusting behavior preemptively to avoid correction. Fear becomes internalized, no longer needing enforcement. What's unsettling is how quickly this self-regulation replaces conscience. Characters stop asking whether something is right and start asking whether it is permitted. Moral language fades, replaced by procedural logic. Actions are evaluated based on alignment, not consequence. The film frames this shift without commentary, allowing it to unfold as a natural progression rather than a warning. By doing so, it implicates the audience in recognizing the pattern rather than reacting against it. This technique reflects a deeper understanding of control. The most effective systems do not rely on punishment. They rely on anticipation. When people fear the possibility of correction more than the act itself, authority becomes invisible. The film illustrates this through subtle behavioral changes: lowered voices, careful phrasing, hesitation before speaking. No one needs to threaten violence. Everyone already knows the rules. The slow erosion of personal judgment is made even more disturbing by the absence of visible resistance. Characters who hesitate are not punished dramatically. They are corrected, gently reminded of their places, then absorbed back into routine. This normalization strips dissent of urgency. Questioning becomes awkward rather than dangerous, socially discouraged rather than violently suppressed. The irony is that the film never frames this environment as overtly hostile. From the outside, the community appears calm and orderly. From the inside, it functions smoothly. Only the audience is allowed to sense the accumulating pressure. And by the time that pressure becomes obvious, it is already too late to trace where consent ended and coercion began. 8. The film's handling of authority avoids the familiar trope of a single dominant figure controlling the group through charisma. Instead, power is distributed across the community itself. Orders are rarely delivered dramatically. They are repeated, echoed, and reinforced through collective agreement. This diffusion of authority ensures that no one person appears responsible, even when harm occurs. The Night God Screamed portrays leadership less as command and more as expectation. Characters behave a certain way because it is assumed they will. Deviating from that expectation feels like a breach of identity rather than disobedience. The film suggests that once a group internalizes its rules, leadership becomes symbolic. Control no longer needs direction. It sustains itself. This approach strips the audience of an easy antagonist. There is no villain to hate, no central figure to confront. Instead, the threat is structural. Every member participates whether actively or passively. Silence becomes endorsement. Compliance becomes contribution. The film quietly asks whether responsibility still exists when everyone is only following what has already been agreed upon. The absence of a single authority figure also reflects real-world anxieties. Systems that rely on shared belief are harder to dismantle because they lack a clear target. Removing one person changes nothing if the structure remains intact. The film mirrors this reality by denying viewers a moment of confrontation or exposure. Authority is never unmasked because it was never hidden. The unsettling twist is that this form of power appears stable. It does not crack under pressure. It does not need violence to survive. The community functions precisely because everyone believes they are doing the right thing. And that belief shared evenly becomes far more dangerous than any single leader ever could. 9. Perhaps the most disturbing element of The Night God Screamed is how it treats belief as an environment rather than an idea. Faith is not debated, challenged, or defended. It simply exists, shaping behavior the way weather shapes a landscape. Characters do not question belief because questioning feels unnatural, almost meaningless. The film presents this condition as normal within the community, refusing to dramatize doubt as heroic or enlightening. This portrayal removes the comfort of ideological distance. The audience is not invited to reject belief outright. Instead, they are asked to observe how belief operates when it becomes invisible. Once faith defines reality, actions no longer require justification. They only require consistency. The film's characters are not extremists in their own eyes. They are caretakers of order, preserving what they believe must be preserved. The film reinforces this by avoiding overt symbolism or sermons. There are no grand declarations of purpose. Belief is communicated through repetition, routine, and shared language. Over time, these elements merge into an atmosphere that feels self-evident. To resist it would require not courage, but imagination, the ability to conceive of a different reality. This subtlety makes the film difficult to process emotionally. There is no moment where belief collapses or reveals itself as false. Instead, it persists calmly, even as harm accumulates. The audience is left watching a system that never questions itself because it no longer knows how. The chilling irony is that the film never suggests belief is inherently dangerous. What it suggests is far more unsettling. Belief becomes dangerous when it stops needing to explain itself. And once explanation disappears, so does the possibility of accountability. 10. One of the film's most unsettling strategies is how it treats time. In The Night God Screamed, time does not move toward resolution or escape. It circles. Days repeat themselves with slight variations enough to suggest change, but never enough to produce progress. This cyclical rhythm reinforces the feeling that events are inevitable rather than chosen. Characters do not plan for a future. They maintain a present that feels endlessly renewable. The absence of temporal markers makes it difficult to track cause and effect. Actions are not framed as responses to specific moments, but as continuations of established patterns. When something disturbing occurs, it feels less like an incident and more like the next step in a process that has been unfolding long before the audience arrived. The film never clarifies when things began to go wrong, because within the system, nothing ever officially did. This treatment of time mirrors how belief-based structures protect themselves. By removing the sense of before and after, responsibility becomes diffuse. There is no clear starting point to challenge, no turning point to correct. Everything simply feels like the way things have always been. The film quietly suggests that this is one of the most effective ways control persists, by erasing memory of alternatives. The pacing reinforces this effect. Scenes often end without emphasis, cutting away before emotions peak. The audience is denied narrative closure, repeatedly trained to accept incompleteness as normal. Over time, that denial becomes familiar. What initially feels unsettling gradually becomes expected, mirroring the character's own adjustment to the system. The irony is that this timelessness makes the film harder to forget. Without a clear arc or resolution, it resists being contained as a finished story. It lingers instead, suggesting that systems like the one depicted do not belong to a specific era. They exist wherever repetition replaces reflection, and they rarely announce when they begin. 11. The Night God Screamed also stands out for how it minimizes emotional language. Characters rarely speak in terms of fear, doubt, or guilt. Instead, they use neutral, functional phrasing that frames actions as necessary rather than chosen. This linguistic shift has a powerful effect. When emotion is removed from decision-making, morality becomes procedural. Right and wrong dissolve into compliance and deviation. The film treats this emotional flattening as a feature, not a flaw. Passion is subtly discouraged. Calmness is praised. Strong reactions are viewed as instability rather than warning signs. Over time, characters learn to suppress visible discomfort, not because they are forced to, but because discomfort feels inappropriate within the system. The result is a community that appears orderly while quietly abandoning empathy. This suppression of emotion also affects the audience. Viewers are not guided toward how they should feel. There is no musical cue demanding fear or outrage. Scenes unfold with an almost clinical detachment, forcing the audience to supply their own emotional response. That absence of guidance can feel disorienting, even alienating, but it serves a precise purpose. It mirrors the emotional environment the characters inhabit. The film's refusal to moralize openly leaves viewers without reassurance. There is no narrative voice labeling actions as wrong. Instead, the audience is asked to recognize the cost of emotional erasure on their own. That recognition arrives slowly, often after discomfort is already settled in. The disturbing irony is that the film suggests emotion is not removed to prevent harm, but to enable it. Once empathy is classified as disruption, cruelty can proceed smoothly without resistance or regret. 12. Perhaps the film's most troubling implication is how easily violence blends into normality once it is justified by structure. The Night God Screamed does not treat violent acts as extraordinary events. They are framed as corrections adjustments made to preserve balance. This framing strips violence of its shock value and replaces it with a sense of administrative necessity. Characters do not appear to struggle with what they are doing. They struggle only with whether they are doing it correctly. The film presents this distinction with chilling clarity. When violence is detached from emotion and absorbed into routine, it no longer feels like violence at all. It feels like maintenance. The film's visual restraint reinforces this idea. Moments that could be staged dramatically are understated or implied. Attention remains on process rather than outcome. This choice forces the audience to confront the logic behind the actions rather than reacting to their intensity. It is not the act itself that horrifies, but the calm certainty with which it is carried out. This portrayal reflects a broader fear that emerged in the cultural consciousness. Of the time, the realization that systems could produce harm without requiring hatred or rage. Violence could emerge from order, not chaos. The film does not explain this fear. It simply demonstrates it quietly and repeatedly. The irony is that by refusing to sensationalize violence, the film makes it more unsettling. There is no spectacle to distance the viewer, no exaggeration to dismiss. What remains is the uncomfortable suggestion that violence does not always announce itself as evil. Sometimes it arrives politely wrapped in procedure. 13. What makes The Night God Screamed especially unsettling is how it refuses to frame its events as a descent. There is no dramatic turning point where the community falls into extremism. Instead, the film presents a world that already functions this way. The audience arrives late after the rules have been established and internalized. This narrative choice eliminates the comfort of witnessing corruption unfold. There is nothing to trace backward, no moment where things clearly went wrong. By denying an origin point, the film subtly shifts responsibility. If no one remembers a beginning, then no one feels accountable for the system itself. Characters act as caretakers of an inherited order, rather than architects of harm. The film suggests that danger does not always emerge from radical change. Sometimes it persists precisely because it feels continuous. The community does not believe it has become something else. It believes it has remained faithful. This framing also affects how the audience interprets blame. Without a visible transformation, it becomes harder to assign guilt to specific choices. Everything feels inevitable, as if resistance would require undoing reality itself. The film never explains how the belief system was constructed, only how efficiently it now operates. That omission is deliberate. It mirrors how real-world systems of control often survive by obscuring their origins. The absence of history also creates a sense of permanence. The community appears timeless, existing outside social progress or moral evolution. This timelessness reinforces the idea that belief once stabilized can outlive the people who created it. Individuals may come and go, but the structure remains intact, unchanged by individual conscience. The irony is that by avoiding a story of corruption, the film makes its world feel more authentic. There is no exaggerated fall from grace, no melodramatic warning. What remains is the quiet suggestion that systems like this don't need to become dangerous. They simply need to continue. 14. The film's unsettling power is amplified by how little it relies on cinematic spectacle. There are no elaborate camera movements designed to impress, no dramatic lighting shifts to announce danger. Instead, the visual language remains restrained and functional, mirroring the emotional tone of the community itself. This lack of stylization denies the audience the visual cues typically used to signal horror. By stripping away spectacle, the film removes distance. Viewers are not invited to admire the craftsmanship of fear. They are asked to sit with it. Ordinary spaces remain ordinary, even when harm occurs within them. This choice reinforces the film's central idea. Danger does not require theatrical presentation. It can exist comfortably within the familiar. The camera often observes from a neutral position, rarely aligning fully with any one character's perspective. This detachment prevents emotional identification and encourages observation instead. The audience becomes a witness rather than a participant, watching patterns repeat without intervention. That observational stance can feel cold, but it is intentional. It mirrors the moral detachment the film is critiquing. This visual restraint may explain why the film struggled to resonate with audiences seeking entertainment rather than confrontation. There is nothing visually spectacular to remember, no iconic imagery to summarize the experience. The film resists being reduced to moments. It exists as an atmosphere rather than a sequence of highlights. The irony is that this refusal to entertain visually has allowed the film to linger psychologically. Without spectacle to distract, viewers are left with ideas rather than images. And those ideas, once absorbed, are far harder to forget. 15. One of the most disturbing undercurrents in The Night God Screamed is its suggestion that morality can become performative. Characters do not behave ethically because they feel compassion. They behave correctly because correctness has become a visible requirement. Goodness is measured through compliance, not empathy. The film presents this shift without judgment, allowing it to unfold as a social norm rather than a moral failure. In this environment, appearances matter more than intention. Public alignment with belief becomes a form of currency. Characters learn which behaviors signal loyalty and which invite suspicion. Over time, sincerity becomes irrelevant. What matters is whether one appears to belong. The film implies that once morality becomes performative, it loses its ability to restrain harm. This idea is reinforced through subtle interactions. Approval is granted through silence, disapproval through absence. No one needs to accuse or condemn openly. Social cues do the work. The system rewards those who mirror its values convincingly, regardless of what they actually believe. As a result, ethical behavior becomes indistinguishable from obedience. The audience is left watching a community where morality no longer functions as a guide for action, but as a badge of membership. The distinction is small, but its consequences are enormous. When ethics are measured externally, harm can be committed sincerely, even proudly. The chilling irony is that the film never suggests anyone is pretending. Performative morality becomes internalized so completely that it feels genuine. And once belief feels sincere, accountability quietly disappears. 16. As the night god screamed moves closer to its conclusion, it becomes increasingly clear that the film is less concerned with shock than with endurance. The horror does not escalate in volume or intensity. It simply persists. The same patterns repeat, the same language circulates, the same logic governs every decision. What changes is not the system, but the audience's tolerance for it. Discomfort accumulates quietly without release. This persistence reflects one of the film's most unsettling ideas, that harm does not need to worsen to become unbearable. It only needs to continue. The community's routines are never interrupted by reflection or doubt. Each action reinforces the next, creating a loop that feels impossible to break. The film suggests that once a system reaches this level of stability, collapse becomes unlikely. There is nothing dramatic to disrupt it. The character's endurance mirrors this structure. They do not rebel, because rebellion would require imagining an alternative. Instead, they adapt. Adaptation becomes survival. Over time, survival replaces morality as the primary concern. The film portrays this shift without melodrama, allowing it to feel natural rather than tragic. That naturalness is precisely what makes it disturbing. By refusing to heighten its stakes conventionally, the film denies the audience a sense of progression. There is no countdown to disaster, no clear warning of escalation. Everything feels already in motion, already normalized. The audience is forced to confront a reality where harm does not announce itself through intensity, but through repetition. The unsettling irony is that endurance itself becomes the film's most frightening element. There is no single moment to point to as the worst. What lingers instead is the realization that a system capable of sustaining harm quietly may be far more dangerous than one that collapses under its own excess. 17. The night god screamed offers no external rescue, and that absence is deliberate. No authority arrives to intervene. No outside voice challenges the community's logic. The film exists entirely within the closed system it depicts, reinforcing the idea that outside accountability is irrelevant once belief becomes self-sustaining. This choice removes the audience's last safety net. By eliminating external perspective, the film denies viewers a moral anchor. There is no character who fully represents common sense or societal norms. Any hint of outside influence is treated as disruption rather than correction. The community does not fear external judgment because it no longer recognizes its legitimacy. Its rules are complete. This narrative isolation forces the audience into an uncomfortable position. Without an external reference point, viewers must evaluate events using their own internal compass. The film does not guide that evaluation. It observes. This lack of guidance can feel disorienting, even frustrating, but it serves a precise purpose. It mirrors how closed systems reject oversight by redefining authority internally. The film's refusal to introduce rescue or punishment also resists narrative closure. There is no moment of justice, no restoration of balance. The system remains intact, uninterrupted by consequence. This challenges the expectation that stories exist to resolve moral tension. Here, tension is allowed to persist. The chilling irony is that by excluding external judgment, the film implies that systems like this do not collapse because they are exposed. They collapse only if they are questioned from within, and the film offers no evidence that such questioning is likely to occur. 18. By the time The Night God Screamed reaches its final moments, the audience may realize that the film has been quietly shifting responsibility the entire time. It never asks who caused the harm. It asks who allowed it to continue. The absence of clear villains becomes its most pointed accusation. Everyone participates. Everyone contributes. No one feels singularly guilty. This collective responsibility undermines the comfort of moral distance. Viewers cannot dismiss the events as the actions of a few corrupted individuals. The film suggests that harm emerges from agreement, not deviance. When belief is shared widely enough, accountability dissolves completely. Each person becomes a small part of something larger and therefore feels less responsible for the outcome. The film reinforces this idea by ending without confrontation. There is no exposure, no reckoning. The system does not need to defend itself because it no longer recognizes opposition. What remains is a sense of unresolved complicity lingering long after the story ends. This unresolved quality may explain why the film feels so uneasy to revisit. It offers no reassurance that awareness leads to prevention. Instead, it leaves the audience with a question that cannot be easily answered. At what point does participation become guilt? The final irony is that the film's title suggests a divine outcry, yet no voice ever intervenes. What screams instead is silence, the quiet agreement that allows harm to persist without resistance. 19. The Night God Screamed becomes most unsettling when it reveals how language itself functions as a form of containment. By the film's final stretch words, no longer describe reality, they replace it. Actions are no longer judged by their impact, but by whether they fit approved terminology. Once behavior is successfully renamed, it becomes difficult to oppose. Harm does not disappear. It simply changes labels. Throughout the film, vocabulary grows narrower. Certain phrases repeat while others vanish entirely. Words associated with doubt, fear, or personal judgment quietly fade from use. In their place come neutral institutional terms that sound corrective rather than violent. This linguistic narrowing mirrors the shrinking moral space within the community. If something cannot be named, it cannot be challenged. The film never draws attention to this process directly. There is no speech explaining how language manipulates thought. Instead, the audience is left to notice the repetition, the absence, the careful phrasing that turns decisions into procedures. Characters rarely say they want something. They say it is required. Desire disappears. Obligation takes its place. This shift has a numbing effect. Once everything is framed as necessity, resistance feels irrational. Language removes urgency, smoothing over conflict before it can form. The audience watches as meaning itself becomes regulated until questioning the system feels linguistically impossible. There are no words left to express dissent. The unsettling implication is that control does not need to silence people. It only needs to teach them which words are acceptable. Once language is contained, thought follows. The film suggests that belief systems survive not through force, but through vocabulary. The irony is that the film's own quiet language makes this process harder to detect. There are no slogans, no overt propaganda. What remains is a subtle reshaping of meaning, and by the time the audience notices, the transformation is already complete. 20. By its conclusion, The Night God Screamed leaves the audience with an absence rather than an answer. There is no final revelation, no dramatic exposure of truth. The film ends without clarifying whether the system will continue or collapse, because that question is ultimately irrelevant. What matters is that the system has already proven it can exist without justification. This lack of closure frustrates traditional expectations. Viewers are trained to expect consequences lessons, or at least acknowledgement. The film denies all three. It does not punish belief. It does not condemn faith outright. It simply presents a structure and steps aside. That restraint forces the audience to confront their own need for resolution. The final moments feel less like an ending and more like abandonment. The story does not resolve because the conditions it depicts are unresolved by nature. The film suggests that belief-based systems do not end cleanly. They fade, persist, or transform quietly, often unnoticed. The absence of a moral verdict becomes its most pointed statement. This approach reframes the entire experience. The film is not warning that extremism is shocking or dramatic. It is warning that extremism can be boring, procedural, and quietly sustainable. That idea lingers far longer than spectacle ever could. The closing irony is that after spending the entire film exploring obedience, the story refuses to tell the audience what to think. There is no directive, no lesson spelled out. The film ends by returning responsibility to the viewer, asking without words whether recognizing a system is enough to stop it. What makes The Night God Screamed linger long after the final scene is not any single image or event, but the uncomfortable way it refuses to draw a clear line between fiction and possibility. The film never claims to be based on a true story, yet it carefully avoids exaggeration. There are no rituals pushed to absurd extremes, no characters behaving in ways that feel implausible for real people. Everything remains restrained, grounded, and disturbingly ordinary. That restraint is what gives the film its lasting power. By the time the credits roll, the audience may realize that nothing truly happened in the traditional sense. There was no revelation, no sudden collapse of belief, no dramatic exposure of wrongdoing. The system simply continued doing what it was designed to do. This refusal to escalate into spectacle forces a different kind of reflection. The film does not ask whether the events were shocking. It asks whether they were believable. In hindsight, the film feels less like a horror story and more like a case study presented without commentary. It observes how belief, once insulated from challenge, reorganizes morality into something procedural and efficient. The lack of emotional manipulation is deliberate. The film does not push the audience toward outrage or fear. It allows discomfort to emerge naturally through recognition rather than reaction. This may explain why the film never achieved mainstream attention. It offers no clear villain to condemn, no catharsis to enjoy. Instead, it leaves viewers alone with a question that feels uncomfortably personal. At what point does quiet agreement become participation? The film never answers this question because answering it would provide relief. And relief is precisely what it denies. The final irony is that The Night God Screamed does not accuse belief itself. It accuses certainty. It suggests that the most dangerous systems are not built on hatred or chaos, but on calm conviction that no longer feels the need to explain itself. Once belief becomes self-justifying, violence no longer needs passion. It only needs permission, and permission, the film implies, is often given silently. The course The Night God Screamed never tells you what to believe, and it never tells you how to feel. It simply leaves you alone with the structure it has shown and trusts that discomfort will do the rest. If belief can turn into procedure and obedience can replace conscience, then the line between faith and control becomes dangerously thin. Some viewers see this film as a forgotten cult horror relic. Others see it as a warning that arrived too early to be understood. So what do you think this film really was? A product of its era, or a reflection of something that never went away? Let us know which detail unsettled you the most in the comments.